In this video, I'm going to show you how to repair a television that clicks on and off rather than powering on. First thing we need to do is remove this back panel. So just start finding every screw you can find and removing it. I like to do these bottom screws in the center here last, since they attach to my stand. Now this should come right out of here. We'll just set that aside. Okay, so I know this is my power board, and the reason I do that is because it's the board that the power cord plugs into. What I've done is I've went ahead and disconnected all the connectors from this power board. And I'm going to plug in the TV and see if it clicks on and off with just the power board. If it does, then that makes me think that my problem could be in that power board. So let's try this. Plugging it in. I do not hear a clicking sound. Nothing's going on the front of the TV. So that makes me think that my power board is likely to be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug this. This power board happens to have high voltage in it, and so it's a good idea to wait a few minutes before moving on. Definitely don't touch anything right now, because even though the power supply is unplugged, these little capacitors store power temporarily, and so they've stored it and they are slowly releasing it as we speak. So now that I've waited a few minutes, we're going to work through this by plugging in the next just one board and see if that makes the clicking noise resume. The next board I want to do is called the main logic board, and that board on this TV is down here, and I know it's that board because it's the one that has all these, like the TV tuner connects into it and a lot of the other things. It's sort of like a computer board. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and plug in this one, and only this one, to the power supply. And we're going to see if that makes the clicking start when I plug this back in. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I heard it turn on. The TV turned on. I hear the noise. That's the first time I've heard that turning on noise. So that means it's not my main board that's causing the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug this now and let things kind of die down a little bit. One thing I want to mention is that it's important to do the main board after the power board, and then move on to the other boards after the main board. And the reason is because sometimes the main board can supply power to your other boards. On this TV, I don't think that is true, but on other TVs it is. So if you do happen to have a different TV, you know, kind of work in the order of test your power board first, then move to your main board, and then from there test other boards. Okay, the next board that I'm going to plug in is this one, which I believe is called the logic control board. Okay, I wanted to make sure the camera was on. So let's plug this one in right here. We're going to go ahead and plug this in and see what happens. Okay, so TV works. So everything's still good. So that board is deemed to be good as well. Let's go ahead and unplug. And we'll wait a few minutes and plug in that one. Okay, I just plugged in this board. Let's plug it in. So at the moment, that means everything's plugged in. So TV shouldn't work now. Let's see what happens. And we got the clicking noise again.
So at this point, it looks like the Y main board is bad, but we can't be certain of that yet. If you notice, there's one other board that hasn't been tested up right there. And that board actually gets its power from the Y main board. So what we need to do is disconnect it so that we can confirm that it's not actually this board up in the top right hand corner of the TV that's causing our problem, and that it is indeed the Y main board.
So that's disconnected now. That means this board, which is our final board, should not have any power. So if I plug this in and we have the clicking noise, then I feel pretty comfortable knowing this is our problem board. If I plug this in and we don't have the clicking noise, then it makes me think that one is our problem board. Okay, so we have the clicking on and off again. So I'm ruling this is our bad board. I'm going to pull it out and we're going to go through the capacitors on it. Make certain that those are all within spec, because that tends to be the first thing that would go wrong on one of those. If I do not find any bad capacitors, then we may end up just replacing the whole board. Those can be pretty affordable, and so let's do that. First thing I do is look at all these capacitors and see if any of them look swollen or if any of them look like they are leaking. A lot of times you can just see it with your eyes, and a capacitor is these things that they almost look like batteries, and that's because a capacitor is sort of like a battery. It stores energy. Where a battery stores it long term, a capacitor stores it and filters it short term. But I didn't see any that looked visually bad. I'm also just checking on the back to see if I have any burnt spots on this board, and I don't see any. So let's do some real testing. So a lot of y'all probably have something called a multimeter, and you can use a multimeter to test capacitors by setting it to cap. The problem is that these to test for capacitance, you actually technically need these capacitors to be out of circuit, which means you would have to unsolder each one from the board and test it, and then determine whether it's good or bad. I've seen people get by just going ahead and doing it this way, and sometimes they can find the bad capacitor and take it out and then test it for certain to make sure it's bad, but it's really not the best way to do it. What I use is called an ESR tester, and these cost about the same amount as a multimeter, maybe a little bit more, but these allow you to test capacitors in circuit. So there's a chart on these ESR meters that tell you what a capacitor should read at. So you take let's do one of these big ones first. If you look at the side of this big capacitor, it says 150 microfarad and 250 volts. And so I'm going to test it, and since it's 250 volts, I know that I'm way over here on this chart, and then what was it, 150 microfarads, so it's going to be on this line here. And so I know that when I test this capacitor, my ESR reading should be less than what looks to be about 5, because over here on this range is how much ESR you should have. And this is a good capacitor will have less ESR than what is shown on this chart. So let's go ahead and test this first one. So I've turned my meter on. So we're looking for less than 5. I'm gonna flip this thing over, put one lead here, if I can get the clip on, and then another lead here. Whoops. And so this capacitor has 0.13 ESR, and that means that it's a good capacitor. It's far less than 5. And so what I'm going to do is test each and every capacitor like that, figure out what the range is, and then go ahead and clip on and see if I can find a bad capacitor. So I'm checking these little ones, checking the big ones, checking basically everything that looks like a battery, and we'll go from there.
I went through all my capacitors and did not find any that were bad. So at this point, I would just recommend replacing the whole board. They're not that expensive, and it's a lot easier than trying to dive in and find the individual problem. But had you found a bad capacitor, which is fairly likely, what you would just need to do is order another one of similar values and then use a soldering iron to remove the bad one and replace it with a new one.
So I got on eBay and I ordered a replacement Y-main board for $18. This one's used. And let's go ahead and reinstall it. Okay. We're all plugged in. Let's go around to the front of the TV. I hear the baby calling me. She seems to know whenever I'm shooting a video that it's time to wake up and cry. There we go. TV works.
I hope this video helped you, and if it did, please help my little family by clicking that subscribe button. We just bought 90 acres that we're hoping to turn into our dream farm, so not only will I be posting videos that show you how to fix almost anything, you also get to follow us on the adventure of raising 4 kids on a dirt road. I appreciate you.